Friends, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you in advance. The Lost Book of Noah. Hear now, O listener, the words of the Book of the Upright, the Sefer ha-Yashar, a record of the generations from the beginning. This is the account of the great deluge, a story of a world judged and a single thread of grace preserved in the heart of the waters. After the days of Enoch, who walked with the Elohim and was taken from the earth, a shadow fell upon the generations of man. The light of his righteousness faded, and in its place, a great corruption swelled upon the face of the world. The sons of the mighty, the Nephilim, whose power was great in the earth, turned their strength to wickedness. Every imagination of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil, continuously. The earth was filled with violence, and the land was defiled, crying out with a silent, terrible voice that rose from the soil itself, from the blood of the slain that soaked into the dust. Cities became pits of iniquity. Men no longer built altars to the Most High but fashioned for themselves idols of stone and wood, and worse, they bowed to the desires of their own hearts, making a god of greed and a temple of their own flesh. Justice was perverted, the strong preyed upon the weak without fear, for there was no fear of the judge of all the earth before their eyes. It was a time of roaring, of clamor, of the clashing of swords and the cries of the oppressed, a cacophony of ruin that rose up like a foul smoke, a stench in the nostrils of heaven. And in those days, when the darkness was at its deepest, a child was born. His name was Noah, which is to say, rest or comfort. For his father, Lamech, looked upon the toil and the sorrow of the earth, cursed since the days of Adam, and he said, "This one shall bring us rest from our work and from the painful labor of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord has cursed." It was a hope, a fragile prayer spoken into a world that had forgotten how to pray. Noah grew. And as the world descended further into the abyss, he alone found a different path. While the hearts of other men were swept away in the torrent of wickedness, Noah's heart remained anchored. He walked with the Elohim, as Enoch had walked in a former age. In the midst of the universal filth, he found a way to remain clean. He was a righteous man, tzaddik. He was whole, tamim, in his generations. It was not that his bloodline was pure, for all lines were now tainted, but that in the context of his own corrupt era, his soul was a perfect, unblemished thing. He stood as a solitary oak in a field of blasted stumps, his roots drinking from a deeper, hidden spring. And the Lord saw. He saw the vast, sprawling cancer of man's evil, a creation turning in upon itself to devour its own soul. And his heart was grieved, a profound, cosmic sorrow. The regret was immense. But his gaze also fell upon Noah. And in that one man, he found a point of light, a single ember spared from the general conflagration. Noah found favor, chen, in the eyes of the Lord. It was an unmerited grace, a weight of regard that settled upon him, marking him as the vessel of the world's future. Then came the word, not in a dream, but clear and terrible in its clarity. The voice of the Elohim came to Noah, a sound that shook the very foundations of his spirit. "The end of all flesh has come before me," the voice declared, a sentence passed upon the entire theater of life. "For the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them, and the earth with them." But the sentence was followed by a command, an impossible task that was also an unimaginable mercy. Make for yourself an ark, a chest of gopher wood. You shall make rooms, kinnim, in the ark, and you shall coat it inside and out with pitch. The specifications were given, precise and vast. The dimensions were of a colossal box, a floating mountain of timber, 300 cubits its length, 50 cubits its width, and 30 cubits its height. A window you shall make for it, finishing it to a cubit from the top. A door you shall set in its side. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. This was the divine blueprint for salvation, a prison that would become a womb. And to Noah, the solitary righteous man, was given the burden of building it. He was to become the architect of the only refuge in a world destined for utter annihilation. The command was his to obey, the labor his to endure, and the scorn of a doomed mankind his to bear, all for a favor he did not earn, and a hope he could not yet fully see. And so Noah began. The first strike of his axe against the gopher wood was a solitary sound, a declaration of faith in a world deaf to portents. He did not delay. He gathered his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and to them he revealed the terrible and glorious charge laid upon their house. They looked upon their father, this man who walked with the unseen, and they saw the certainty in his eyes, a certainty that brooked no argument. They believed, and their belief became the foundation of the work. The site of their labor was a place of divine appointment, far from the bustling iniquity of the cities, a vast, open plain where the sky was a wide bowl overhead. Here, they laid out the colossal dimensions, pegging lines into the earth, marking out a footprint that seemed to mock the scale of human endeavor. 300 cubits. It was a length that defied reason, a structure larger than any palace, any temple, any fortress ever conceived by the kings of the earth. And it was not for glory, but for survival. Not for conquest, but for refuge. The labor was Herculean, a generation-spanning task compressed into the lifetime of one man. They felled the mighty gopher trees, their trunks thicker than 3 men could embrace. The sound of saws and adzes became the rhythm of their days, a percussive counterpoint to the silent prayer in their hearts. They fashioned beams and planks of immense size, smoothing them, joining them. They constructed the 3 tiers, the lowest for ballast and stores, the second for the great host of creatures, the third for Noah, his family, and the birds of the air. They coated every seam, every joint, inside and out, with thick, black pitch, until the entire vessel was sealed against the coming fury, a dark monolith rising slowly against the horizon. And the world looked on. Travelers, merchants, warriors of the Nephilim, they would pass by and stop to stare. At first, it was curiosity. Then, it became mockery. The scorn of men fell upon Noah like an acid rain. They named him the wood borer, the deluded one. They would stand at the edge of the worksite, their faces twisted in derision. An old man's folly, they would shout. Noah, what is this great chest for? Is it to store the harvest of your madness? Another would laugh, gesturing at the cloudless, endless blue sky. He says a flood is coming. A flood from the heavens. Where is this water, old man? We have known only the dew and the seasonal rain since the world began. The sons of the mighty, their frames towering and terrible, would come and kick at the foundations. This wood will be kindling for our fires when your God fails to speak. You build a tomb for your own reputation, nothing more. For decades, the ridicule continued. 120 years, the book records, was the span of their building, and for all that time, Noah labored under the weight of divine command and human contempt. He did not argue. He did not debate. He simply worked, his hands calloused, his back bent, his faith a fortress more impregnable than the ark he was building. He preached, the Sefer ha-Yashar tells us, words of repentance, but they fell on ears stopped up with wickedness. The laughter was his constant companion, a soundtrack to his holy labor. His wife, his sons, their wives, they too endured the sidelong glances, the whispers in the marketplaces. They were the family of the fool, the clan of the cursed. Yet, they held fast. They saw not the mockery of men, but the slow, steady rise of the ark. They saw the precision of the design, the strength of the joinery. And in their father's unwavering countenance, they saw a reflection of a truth the world had forgotten. The door was fashioned, a massive, heavy thing, designed to be sealed from the outside, by a hand not their own. The window, the tzohar, was finished, a cubit from the top, their only conduit to the world beyond the wooden walls. The final pot of pitch was smeared, and the ark stood complete. A silent, black, and utterly alien shape on the green plain. A monument either to supreme faith or to ultimate folly. And in the heavens, the patient one watched, and the measure of iniquity was nearly full. The time of the foretold end of all flesh was at hand. The sounds of construction had ceased. Now, there was only a waiting, a profound and terrifying silence, broken only by the distant, carefree laughter of a world dining on the eve of its own destruction. The silence that followed the completion of the ark was more unnerving than the decades of labor. It was a pregnant quiet, a held breath spanning the earth. For 7 days, it was so. Noah and his household waited within the skeletal frame of the immense vessel, surrounded by the vast stores of food they had gathered, the scent of hay and grain thick in the still air. They did not venture out. The command had been given, enter the ark. And so they were in it, a tiny congregation in a cavern of wood, waiting for the world to change. Then, on the 7th day, a tremor passed through the earth, not of violence, but of purpose. It began as a distant rustle, a whisper that grew into a low thunder. Noah stood at the great, open doorway, looking out upon the plain. And he saw them. They came from the 4 corners of the world, not in a chaotic stampede, but in a solemn, ordered procession, as if guided by an invisible shepherd. From the misty forests came the great beasts, the behemoth with its tree-like limbs, the shaggy aurochs with horns like crescent moons, the silent wolves and the roaring lions. They came in pairs, male and female, their eyes holding an ancient knowing, a submission to a law greater than their own instincts. They did not snarl or flee from one another. The wolf lay down with the lamb, not in allegory, but in stark, breathtaking reality, there on the threshold of salvation. From the skies, a multitude of wings blotted out the sun. Eagles and sparrows, vultures and doves, every bird according to its kind, descended in a swirling, feathered cloud, finding their way to the openings prepared for them, settling into the 3rd deck with a rustle and a coo. And from the crevices of the earth, the small things came, the creeping things, the insects with their iridescent shells, the serpents moving in silent curves, the mice and the lizards. All life that breathed the breath of life, all in whose nostrils was the spirit of existence, came in pairs, by sevens for the clean animals, the ones designated for sacrifice and for a purer renewal. It was a spectacle of divine logistics, a census of creation answering a silent roll call. Noah did not herd them. He did not seek them out. He stood as the steward, the doorkeeper, and watched as the Creator delivered his creation to the doorstep of the ark. For days this procession continued, a river of fur, feather, and scale flowing into the wooden mountain. The air was filled with the scent of them, the sound of their calls and movements echoing in the vast, dark interior, the lowing of cattle, the bleat of sheep, the chitter of insects, the soft pad of great cats. Finally, the last of the creatures was housed. The immense holds were filled with the breath and warmth of a preserved world. The rustling, the stirring, the low murmurs of the animals settled into a steady, living hum. The ark was no longer an empty shell, it was a living repository, a floating menagerie under one roof. Then, the voice of the Elohim came to Noah once more, a final instruction before the sealing. Come, you and all your household, into the ark. It was an invitation, yet it carried the weight of a final command. Noah turned to his family, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, their faces pale but resolute in the dim light, their wives, their eyes wide with a terror and awe beyond words. He led them across the threshold, the same one the animals had crossed. They stood inside, looking out at the world for the last time. The sun was shining. The grass was green. The world looked utterly, deceptively normal. It was a perfect, taunting stillness. And then it happened. They felt it before they saw it. A deep, resonant shudder in the wood of the ark, a groaning of timbers. Noah looked out the great door and saw not a man, not an angel, but an unseen, irresistible force moving the massive door. It was the hand of the Lord himself. With a slow, final, grinding sound that spoke of irrevocable judgment, the great door of gopher wood, the door they had built with their own hands, swung inward, then shut. A profound darkness fell, broken only by the faint light from the sealed window above. They were inside. The world was outside. And the door was shut. No hand of man could open it now. They were entombed, yet they were saved. They were prisoners, yet they were the sole heirs of the earth. In the absolute silence that followed the closing of the door, they heard the first sound from the world beyond, a single, sharp crack of thunder that split the sky in two. It was the beginning. The thunder was not like any they had heard before. It was not a sound that rolled and faded in the heavens, it was a tearing, as if the fabric of the firmament itself was being ripped from its moorings. It was the signal. The 7 days of grace were ended. Inside the ark, the world became a symphony of terror and wood. The first drops that struck the roof were not drops at all, but great, solid sheets of water, as if a second ocean had been inverted above them. The Mabul, the cataclysm, had begun. The fountains of the great deep were broken open. From the abyssal trenches of the sea, from the hidden reservoirs beneath the mountains, a pressure that had been held in check since the foundation of the world was unleashed. The earth groaned in its very bones, a deep, seismic roar that competed with the fury from above. Geysers of hot water and steam exploded from fissures that snaked across the continents, swallowing forests and hills in a single, boiling gulp. And the windows of the heavens were opened. This was no rain. It was the collapse of the celestial barrier, the letting loose of the upper waters that had been held back by the hand of God. A solid, endless cataract fell upon the earth, a deluge that had no beginning and no end, a waterfall from the sky that hammered upon the ark with a noise like 1,000 forges. The ark, which had seemed so immense and solid on the dry plain, was now a toy in the grip of titans. It shuddered, it lurched. For a terrifying moment, it remained grounded, the waters swirling around its base, lifting it, testing its seams. Then, with a great groaning of timber that echoed through every deck, it was loosed from the earth. It lifted. It was afloat. Outside, the world was dissolving into chaos. The cries of men, which had once been raised in mockery, were now raised in a unified scream of ultimate horror. They saw the waters rise, not as a river floods, but as an ocean reclaims a beach, with an inexorable, swift finality. The mighty, the Nephilim, whose strength had made them kings, beat upon the sides of the ark with their great fists, their roars of fury turning to shrieks of terror as the pitch-black wood, sealed by God, offered no purchase, no mercy. Their strength was as nothing against the rising tide. Fathers fought sons for a handhold on a vanishing cliff face. Mothers clutched infants to their breasts as the waters tore them from their grasp. The violence they had sown was now visited upon them in a measure full, pressed down, and running over. The ark was borne upward, tossed on waves that were now mountains, now valleys. Inside, it was a world of darkness, stench, and cacophony. The animals, driven by primal fear, roared and shrieked and stamped. The family of Noah clung to the stout central pillars, their faces pale, their stomachs lurching with every violent pitch and roll. They could hear the world dying outside, the crash of collapsing cities, the splintering of entire forests, the terrible, gurgling silence that followed the screams from a village or a hilltop that was swallowed whole. For 40 days and 40 nights, the cataclysm reigned. The ark drifted on a planet become ocean, a single point of order in a universe of watery chaos. There was no day, no night, only a perpetual, storm-lashed twilight. The great vessel was carried on the currents of a global maelstrom, over the drowned peaks of the mountains where the sons of men had built their altars to pride, over the deep places where Leviathan now swam through the halls of forgotten kings. Noah and his sons worked ceaselessly in the flickering lamplight, calming the beasts, mucking the stalls, checking the stores, their every sense assaulted by the reality of the judgment they had been spared. They were saved, yes, but they were adrift in the tomb of all mankind, and the weight of that knowledge was a heavier burden than the storm itself. They were alone, utterly alone, with the groaning of the wood and the crying of the creatures and the relentless, hammering rain, a drumbeat for the funeral of a world. Then, on the 40th day, the hammering ceased. The absence of sound was itself a shock, a physical blow after the relentless roar. The rain stopped. The great cataract from the heavens was shut off as if a sluice gate had been closed in the sky. The fountains of the deep, their fury spent, slowed their boiling surge and sealed themselves once more over the ruins of the world. Silence. A silence so profound it seemed to have a weight and a texture of its own. Inside the ark, the change was felt immediately. The animals, whose constant noise had been a mirror of the outer storm, grew still. The violent pitching and rolling of the vessel eased into a gentle, ponderous rocking. The shrieks and roars softened to uneasy shuffles and low, questioning calls. Noah stood in the darkness, one hand pressed against the cold, pitch-sealed wood of the inner hull. He listened. There was nothing to hear but the creak of their floating world and the slow, rhythmic breathing of the great host around them. The world was dead. They were sailing over its corpse. The waters had prevailed, mightily, upon the earth. All the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. The mountains themselves, the bones of the world, had been submerged. The ark now floated in a boundless, shoreless ocean, under a sky empty of cloud and bird. The wind of God moved upon the face of the waters, a great, steady breath that began to push the massive vessel, guiding it on a currentless sea. For 150 days, this was their existence. A gray, featureless eternity. The window, the Tzohar, provided a sliver of pale light, but it revealed nothing but heaving water and a bleached sky. There were no landmarks, no stars by night, no sun by day, only a diffuse, directionless glow. Time lost its meaning. It was measured only in the feeding cycles, the cleaning of the stalls, the slow, solemn prayers Noah offered in the gloom. They were prisoners of salvation. The air inside was thick and heavy, laden with the smells of hay, dung, sweat, and the musky scent of 1,000 different creatures. The darkness was a palpable thing, broken only by the small, flickering lamps they dared to burn, their flames casting dancing, monstrous shadows on the walls. The family spoke in hushed tones, if they spoke at all. What was there to say? They were the inheritors of a void. The memory of the green earth, of the sun on their faces, of the sound of other human voices, became a painful, distant dream. They waited. There was nothing else to do. They waited for a word, a sign, for the scraping of the keel on some submerged peak. But there was only the gentle, endless rocking, the sighing of the wind, and the silent, patient presence of the animals, who seemed to understand their part in this great, terrible patience. Noah would often climb to the highest deck, near the window, and press his face as close as he could to the sealed opening, straining for a glimpse of anything other than water. But he saw only the endless, gray expanse, a liquid desert under a metallic sky. It was a world scoured clean, purified by a terrible baptism. All the violence, all the clamor, all the pride and the idolatry, all of it was sunk beneath the waves, silenced forever. The justice of the Lord was absolute. The earth was his, and he had washed it. And in the quiet of his heart, Noah understood the full cost of their salvation. They were not merely survivors. They were relics. They were the living memory of a world that had been judged and found wanting. The weight of the future, the entire hope of creation, rested upon the 8 souls and the pairs of creatures in this wooden chest. It was a burden of such magnitude that it could crush a spirit less fortified by faith. But Noah endured. He walked with the Elohim, even here, in the belly of the ark, adrift on the grave of mankind. He waited, because waiting was the only form of worship left to him. Then God remembered Noah. It was not a memory born of forgetfulness, but a turning of divine attention, a shift in purpose from judgment to redemption. The great wind that had blown over the waters was now commanded to subdue them. And God made a spirit to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged their raging and began to sink into the deeps from whence they came. Inside the ark, the change was felt first as a new sound, a deep, grinding groan that vibrated through the very keel of the vessel. It was not the groan of storm-strained timber, but a lower, more fundamental sound, the sound of wood scraping against stone. The gentle, endless rocking ceased, replaced by a sudden, jarring stability. A great lurch threw them all from their feet. The animals bellowed and cried out in fresh alarm. The ark had grounded. It had come to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. For a moment, there was silence again, but this was a different silence. It was not the silence of the deep, but the silence of contact, of a journey ended. They were no longer adrift. They were somewhere. The great chest was lodged, cradled in the stone arms of a drowned peak now emerging from the retreating sea. Noah, his heart pounding against his ribs, climbed to the highest deck, to the window. He pressed his face to the opening, his breath fogging the wood. And he saw it. Not just the endless gray water, but a dark, jagged line against the horizon. A peak. Then another. The tops of the mountains were appearing like islands in a receding tide. The waters were decreasing, continually. The news spread through the family like a fire. Shem, Ham, and Japheth joined him, their faces, pale and strained from the long darkness, now etched with a desperate, fragile hope. They took turns at the window, watching as day by day, more of the world's skeleton was revealed. The waters were abating, their global dominion broken. Yet, the door remained shut. The hand that had sealed it had not yet opened it. They were saved, they were grounded, but they were still imprisoned. The world outside was a world of mud and rock, waterlogged and barren. It was not yet a world for life, only for waiting. And so, another season of patience began. They waited for the earth to dry. They listened to the new sounds from outside, the gurgle of retreating water, the drip of moisture from the high rocks, the howl of a wind that now swept over a landscape of utter desolation. The sight of the mountains was a promise, but it was a promise of a grave, empty world. The silence outside was no longer the silence of the deep, but the silence of the tomb. Noah marked the time. He counted the days from the grounding of the ark. For 40 days, they remained thus, a sealed house on a high mountain, looking out upon a planet slowly draining itself. The hope was a painful thing, a sharp edge that could cut the heart. To have come so far, to have survived the cataclysm, only to be stranded forever in this wooden shell on a barren peak, it was a terror more subtle than the flood, a slow erosion of the spirit. But Noah held fast. He had been given a command to build, and he had built. He had been given a command to enter, and he had entered. Now, he was given the command to wait, and so he would wait. His faith was not in the dryness of the land, but in the faithfulness of the one who had shut the door. The mountains were a sign, but the sign was not the substance. The promise of life was not in the emerging stone, but in the silent, remembering God. And so, in the grounded ark, surrounded by the stirrings of the preserved creation, Noah waited for the next word. At the end of 40 days of watching the peaks emerge like the backs of great, stone leviathans, a new restlessness stirred within Noah. The silence of the grounded ark was different from the silence of the deep. It was a silence of anticipation, of a world holding its breath. The word of the Lord had not yet come to open the door, but a different impulse was placed within Noah's heart, an impulse to seek, to test, to actively participate in the unfolding of this new age. He went to the holds where the clean birds and the unclean were kept. From among them, he chose a raven. It was a creature of cunning and hardiness, its feathers black as the pitch that sealed their vessel, its eyes sharp and knowing. He took it in his hands, feeling the rapid, strong beat of its heart against his palms. Then, climbing to the window, he thrust the bird out into the open air. The raven did not hesitate. It beat its powerful wings, a black speck against the vast, washed-out sky, and flew. But it did not fly far. It circled the ark, a dark sentinel. It would fly out, and then return, perching on the roof or on a nearby outcropping of rock, then fly out again. It found floating carcasses in the receding waters, the bloated remains of the old world, and it fed. The raven found its sustenance in the death that was still present. It went to and fro, according to the Sefer ha-Yashar, until the waters were dried up from the earth. It had no need to return to the ark, for it had made its home in the liminal space between the old death and the new life, a creature of the in-between. Noah watched the raven's satisfied flights and saw its meaning. The world was not yet clean. Death still floated on the face of the waters. He waited another 7 days. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the harsh cry of the raven from its rocky perch. Then he tried again. This time, he chose a dove. Where the raven was harsh and pragmatic, the dove was a symbol of gentleness, of peace, of a purity that could not abide corruption. He sent the dove out from the window, and it flew over the face of the waters. But it found no rest for the sole of its foot. There were no trees, no green shoots, no place for a creature of its kind to alight. The earth was a vast plain of mud and rock, waterlogged and lifeless. The dove, weary, its wings tired, returned to him, to the ark. Noah saw it coming back, a small, gray shape against the immense desolation. He stretched out his hand through the window, and the dove, trusting, flew into it. He drew it back inside, into the warmth and the familiar scent of the wooden world. He felt the frantic beating of its heart against his fingers, a tiny drum of disappointment. The dove had found nothing. The world, though emerging, was not yet a home. This simple act, the sending forth of the birds, was the first liturgy of the new world. It was a prayer of inquiry, offered not with words, but with wings. The raven's report was of a world where death could still sustain life. The dove's report was of a world not yet ready for innocence. And in the space between these two reports, Noah understood the precise, patient work that was still being done. The waters were receding, but the earth was not yet healed. They had to wait. They had to wait for the dove's next flight. For the sign of life would not be a black wing satisfied with carrion, but a green leaf, plucked from the heart of a reborn world. Noah waited another 7 days. The silence in the ark was now filled with a new, potent tension. The failed flight of the dove had not brought despair, but a sharper focus. They were not waiting for the water to vanish, they were waiting for the earth to live again. The dove was their prophet, its fragile form the instrument by which they would discern the rebirth of the world. Once more, he took the dove. He felt the familiar, soft weight of it in his hands, a bundle of trust and potential. He offered it again to the sky through the window. This time, it flew with purpose, its white wings carrying it out over the vast, muddy expanse that stretched between the mountain peaks. The family waited. Hours passed. The sun, now clear and strong in a sky scrubbed clean of wrath, traced its arc above them. They took turns at the window, their eyes straining against the bright emptiness. Then, as the evening drew on, a speck appeared on the horizon. It was the dove. It flew straight for the ark, its flight steady and sure. As it drew near, Noah stretched out his hand. But the dove did not fly directly into it. It circled once, and in the dimming light, they saw it. Clutched in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. A sound, half gasp, half sob, escaped Noah's lips. He had not seen a living, green thing in over a year. The sight of that small, vibrant leaf, a perfect, waxy green, was more stunning, more holy, than the sight of the highest mountain peak. The dove alighted on his hand, and he gently took the leaf from its beak. He held it, a fragile banner of the earth's incredible, resilient grace. The news spread through the ark in whispers. A leaf. It brought a leaf. The animals, as if sensing the shift in the very air, grew quiet. The olive leaf was not just a sign that the waters had receded. A submerged tree could have provided no fresh leaf. This could only mean that the earth had shed the waters. The mud had firmed into soil. The roots had drunk, and the sun had warmed, and the secret, silent work of life had begun again in the deep places. The world was not merely dry, it was fruitful. It was offering a gift. Noah knew then that the end of their confinement was near. The dove, bearing its olive branch, was a messenger of peace from the land itself, a covenant of green between God and the earth. It was a promise that the world would not remain a barren grave, but would once again become a garden. He sent the dove out once more, but this time, according to the record, it did not return to him. It had found its home. It had found the new world ready to receive it. Now came the final test of patience. They had the sign. They had the promise. But the door was still shut. The hand of the Lord remained upon the latch. To open it themselves would be to seize the promise before its time, to trust the sign more than the sign giver. So they waited. They waited for the direct command, for the unmistakable voice that had told them to enter, to now tell them to go out. The sight of that olive leaf, pressed and preserved by Noah, was a constant, quiet testimony in the gloom. It was the first scripture of the new creation, written not on stone, but on living tissue. It declared that the fury was past, the judgment was complete, and the long, patient work of healing had begun. They were on the threshold. They had only to wait for the door to open. A full year and 10 days had passed since the great door had been sealed. A year of darkness, of roaring waters, of profound silence, and finally, of aching hope. Then, the word came. The voice that had commanded the building, the voice that had summoned the animals, the voice that had shut the door, now spoke again within the ark. Go out from the ark, the voice said to Noah, its tone now one of release, of commission. You, and your wife, and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth, and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. The moment had come. The divine imprisonment was over. Noah went to the great door, the very one that had been shut by the unseen hand. He placed his own hands upon the massive beams, the wood worn smooth by a year of the sea's caress. He pushed. With a groan that echoed the groaning of the earth itself, the door swung outward. A blast of air, clean and sharp and cold, rushed into the ark. It was the first truly fresh air they had breathed in a year. It carried the scent of wet stone, of clean water, of raw, newborn earth. It was the smell of the world after the bath of God. They emerged, one by one, blinking in the brilliant, unfiltered light. The sky was a vast, breathtaking blue, a dome of pure lapis lazuli. The sun warmed their faces, a sensation so long forgotten it felt like a new creation. They stood on the ramp of the ark, their feet on the solid, stony ground of Mount Ararat, and they looked out. The world they saw was not the world they had known. It was a stark, clean, elemental place. The mountains, stripped of their forests, rose like the bare bones of the earth, their slopes scarred by the receding waters. Valleys were filled with vast, clear lakes and silver threads of new rivers. There was no green yet, save for the memory of the olive leaf. It was a landscape of rock and water and sky, a canvas wiped clean, awaiting the first brushstrokes of life. Then, behind them, the animals began to emerge. They came out in pairs, their steps tentative at first, then gaining confidence. The great cats, their coats bright in the sun, padded onto the rock and looked about with fierce, wondering eyes. The herds of cattle and sheep lowed and bleated, their calls echoing strangely in the vast, empty spaces. The birds burst from the opening in a riot of color and sound, filling the silent air with song and the beating of wings for the first time since the flood. The creeping things, the insects, the serpents, all flowed out onto the land, swarming over the stone, reclaiming their dominion. It was a second procession, the inverse of the one that had entered the ark. Then, it had been a solemn march into a refuge of impending doom. Now, it was a joyous, chaotic explosion of life onto a stage of infinite possibility. The earth was repopulated in a single, magnificent moment of release. Noah, his heart swollen with a gratitude too vast for words, did the first thing that came to his spirit. He built an altar. He took stones from the mountain, clean and new, and piled them into a rough-hewn platform. Then, from among the clean animals and clean birds, those set apart by sevens for this very purpose, he selected offerings. He did not offer them out of a sense of duty, but out of a profound, overflowing thanks. He laid them on the altar and offered them up as a burnt offering to the Lord. The smoke of the sacrifice rose, a slender, clean column in the pristine air. It was the first smoke from a hearth on the new earth. It was the first act of worship. It was a fragrance of rest, of completion, of a work finished. And the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma. It was not the smell of roasting meat that pleased him, but the smell of a righteous heart, of obedience, of a creation turning back to its Creator in gratitude. And in his heart, the Elohim made a promise, a covenant with himself, with the earth, and with every living creature that would spring from that single, smoking altar on the mountaintop. And the Lord spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, Behold, I establish my covenant with you, and with your seed after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that go out of the ark, even every beast of the earth. I will establish my covenant with you, neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of the flood, neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. The voice was not one of thunder, but of solemn oath, a decree that laid the foundation for the very laws of nature. And God said, This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you, for perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And it was so. As the family stood upon the mountain, a soft rain began to fall, the first since the cataclysm. But this was no rain of wrath. It was a gentle shower, a blessing to water the seed sleeping in the earth. And as the sun broke through the departing clouds, its rays caught the droplets of moisture in the sky, and a great bow of fire and sapphire, of emerald and gold, appeared. It spanned the horizon, a breathtaking arc of impossible beauty set against the retreating gray. It was not a weapon of war laid aside, but a warrior's bow hung in the halls of heaven, a sign of peace. Its presence in the cloud was a promise, a divine memorandum. When I see the bow, I will remember my everlasting covenant. Noah looked upon the rainbow, its colors painting his weathered face, and he knew. He knew the terror of the Lord, and he knew his mercy. The same hand that had broken the fountains of the deep had now set a jewel in the sky. The same voice that had pronounced judgment now whispered an oath that would outlast the sun and the moon. And God blessed Noah and his sons. The first blessing upon the new earth. Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth. The words spoken to Adam in the first garden were spoken again on this barren mountain, charging this new mankind with the same sacred task, but now with the memory of the fire of judgment behind them and the sign of grace above them. So Noah, the tiller of the soil from the old world, began again. He planted a vineyard. He worked the raw, clean earth, and the sun warmed it, and the rains watered it, and the vine took root, a symbol of this new, fragile civilization springing from the 8 souls saved from the waters. The world was renewed. The great silence was broken by the lowing of cattle and the songs of children yet to be born. The earth, washed clean of its violence, was given a second chance, a new beginning founded not on innocence, but on grace, sealed with a rainbow and sanctified by sacrifice. But hear now the final word of this account, a whisper of warning woven into the fabric of the renewal. The seed of man was now planted in a soil that remembered the flood. The heart of man, though preserved in the ark, remained the same heart. The fear of the Lord was upon the nations that would spring from the sons of Noah, but pride, that ancient serpent, did not drown in the deluge. It had found passage in the ark, hidden in the heart of a son. It would stir again. It would build. It would reach, once more, for the heavens. For though the world was made new, the nature of man was not remade. The bow in the cloud was a promise of restraint from God, not a promise of perfection from man. The waters were gone, but the potential for the tower remained. The story of the flood was over. The story of grace and the struggle against the pride of men had just begun. If this journey through the Sefer ha-Yashar has resonated with you, if the image of the ark on the boundless waters or the covenant of the rainbow has lingered in your mind, you are not alone. This ancient record was preserved so that we might remember, and so that we might share these stories. By subscribing to this channel, you help ensure that these hidden texts and epic narratives are not lost to silence, but are brought to life, shared, and passed on to a new generation. Your subscription is a signal, a small beacon in the modern noise, that says these stories still matter. Let us know what you felt. Did the righteousness of Noah inspire you? Did the devastation of the flood leave you in awe? Leave a comment below with your thoughts. Your reflection adds a new voice to this ancient conversation. And if you would cast a single stone of favor into the water, consider liking this recording. It is a small token, but it tells the algorithm, that great, unseen current of the digital age, to carry this story further, to other seekers waiting on distant shores. Thank you for listening. May your own path be guided by faith, and may you always look for the signs of the covenant in the world around you.